Welcome to Behind the Sirens, the VFIS of North Carolina series, where we dive into leadership, risk management, and key issues shaping fire and emergency services. Whether you're new or a seasoned pro, we've got insights to help you and your crew lead, protect, and serve with confidence.
Welcome to All Clear Firefighter Health and Wellness. I'm Travis, and we got a great guest with us today. We've got Mr. Jack Sullivan. How are you doing, Mr. Sullivan? Or I'm going to call you Jack.
I'm doing good, Travis.
Hey, so today we're going to be talking about something that is critical to firefighting, to the first responder world. And, you know, we always talk about staying safe, being the best firefighter we can. But one of the biggest issues that we face in the fire service are accidents, and many of them are preventable. And one of the most common areas that we see accidents with are with the vehicles that we drive, the vehicles we're around, the vehicles we try to work with. So we're going to reach out to Jack. We're going to let him kind of talk to us a little bit today. But before we start, why don't you tell us who you are and where you're at and what all you got going on these days?
Travis, I volunteer my time these days as the Director of Training for the Emergency Responder Safety Institute. We were on the website, respondersafety.com, that is primarily focused on roadway incident safety, protecting responders at incident scenes, motor vehicle crashes, vehicle fires, medical emergencies, hazmat incidents, things like that, along all roads and highways in the country. We've been working on that subject since 1998. Well, in 1998, I had just retired from a volunteer fire department in Pennsylvania, and I had moved to Chesterfield, Virginia, where we are now, right outside of Richmond. And shortly after I retired, as a lieutenant and safety officer in that department, we had an incident on the Pennsylvania Turnpike where 10 of our personnel were struck by an out-of-control tractor trailer, killed one firefighter, and put the other 9 in the hospital. And I don't care who you are, what department you run in, if you involve 10 of your personnel in a disaster like that, it's going to get your attention. And what we found in 1998 was that not many people in the fire service were talking about roadway incident safety or highway incident safety. And we've been working on that subject ever since. But in my role as a fire department safety officer, I covered a lot of things that other fire department safety officers are still dealing with today, in addition to all the new issues that have popped up in the last 25 years or so. I spent about 25 years in the volunteer fire service in 3 different departments, and spent 40 years as an insurance loss control representative, working on workplace safety, worker safety, fire protection, general liability, and fleet safety for a variety of different customers all over the Eastern Seaboard.
So would you say that you've been around it a while, obviously. Would you say that in the last decade or two, the accidents, I'm not going to say have gotten worse, but have gotten more complicated or become more involved when it comes to dealing with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing I would tell you is that one of the things we've learned over the last 25 years, we don't call them accidents anymore. They're crashes.
Crashes, okay.
And we call them crashes because what we found over time, and this was true in the industrial world too, even just regular motor vehicle operators around the country, better than 95% of the crashes, for the most part, are related to human error in some way, shape, or form. So the only difference for us is that we're driving ambulances, police cars, chief's buddies, fire trucks, any of the emergency vehicles that you can think of that your listeners are involved with. The technology in those vehicles has changed considerably in the last 10 to 20 years. We have a lot more automation that's in the vehicle. Our fire trucks can do more sometimes now than they could before. Back when I was just getting started in the fire service, everything was a manual transmission. You need 2 hands and 2 feet to operate the truck.
Yep.
And nowadays, almost everything is automatic. The vehicles are capable of going faster than we probably need to go in a lot of cases. When you're talking about a heavyweight vehicle with water on board and all the equipment and extra personnel, when we have a crash nowadays on a modern emergency vehicle, it's much more of an issue than it was years ago. At the same time, these vehicles now have a lot more safety features built into them too that in many cases are saving a bunch in these crashes.
I got you. Now it sounds like data is a pretty big part of your job and collecting data on the crashes. See, I'll say accident at least twice more before we're done today. But you obviously are involved very much in collecting data and things like that. How important would you say that it is for a department to be kind of up to date on, current training, the data that maybe involves their own department? How important is that to help prevent crashes?
I think one of the things that I've learned over time is that when I've been around the fire service now for more than 50 years, there were a lot of things that I didn't learn until I got out of my own backyard. And I had the ability to travel around the country and do training in a variety of different places. And I learned a lot of things from a lot of people who did things differently than the departments that I was in. And data was one of the things that is, even today, still sorely lacking in some areas. So when we had the crash on the Pennsylvania Turnpike that affected 10 of our personnel, I started to research the subject in the same way I did in my safety profession as a certified safety professional. And you always go to find out what's going on in the world, looking for data related to, at that time, firefighters struck by vehicles at incident scenes. And there literally wasn't a whole lot to find on that. I found 3 fire departments in the country through the library at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg who put me in touch with Fairfax County, Virginia, Plano, Texas, and Phoenix, Arizona. Those 3 departments back in 1998 were the only ones that had even addressed in any way, shape, or form the subject of roadway incident safety. And over the last 27 plus years at this point, 28 years now, we have been working hard to get data on roadway incidents where firefighters and EMTs, police officers have been struck and injured or struck and killed. The Emergency Responder Safety Institute tracks struck by fatalities on an almost daily basis. And I got to tell you, Travis, there aren't many days that go by that I don't get an email, a text, a phone call, or something popping up on my social media feed telling me about an emergency vehicle that's been involved in a crash in some way, shape, or form. It's happening someplace all over the country. And a lot of the departments that I work with, they never have personnel that go any further than their own first-on district. They don't know necessarily what's going on around the rest of the country unless they get it through reading trade magazines, following social media posts and things like that, reading NIOSH reports on the various other places that we can get information. And in some cases, that information just doesn't get to people that are the ones who not only make the rules, but enforce the rules and lead the team doing things the right way. So I think networking with people outside our first-on district helps a lot to find out what's going on around us, not only in our own state, but around the rest of the country. And using the resources that are available today through the internet that weren't necessarily readily available years ago is a good way to find out what's happening, and who it's happening to, and what we can learn from these things that happen. And that data collection piece still needs a lot of work. We do not have good information on the struck by incidents that occur on the roadway, on those incidents where there's injuries and just property damage to the emergency vehicles. There is no agency in the country that's collecting that information. We tried to do that at Responder Safety with our small volunteer team. About the only thing that we can do is track the fatalities. We've had 28 struck by fatalities already this year.
Wow.
From roadside incidents where emergency responders have been struck or killed. We know there are far more incidents where responders have been struck, but we don't have the capability to track all the ones that are resulting in injuries. And some of those injuries are pretty serious, involving life-changing pipe injuries, traumatic brain injuries, amputations, things like that, that in many cases those personnel can never return to their original job, whether it's as volunteer or a career in the fire department or whatever the case will be. So we still have a lot of work to do in terms of better data gathering, but the data that is out there is readily available to everybody, mostly through internet resources these days.
Well, I know here in North Carolina, I think one of the big initiatives, we're working with VFIS, who insures a lot of the departments here in North Carolina. I know that they keep very tight numbers on a lot of the incidents that they cover, things that have happened, and I think it would be pretty safe to say that they would be at least a resource here in North Carolina that they could reach out to get a little bit more information. But so, do you think insurance organizations may be a good place to go as well for info?
Absolutely. The downside is they're only willing to share just so much information and not necessarily all the details we'd all like to know. So the FIS was actually the insurance carrier for us when our crash occurred on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And our personnel at the time were just working what was referred to as a routine motor vehicle crash. It's a single car that spun off the road in a rainstorm that required a response for a regular motor vehicle crash with possible entrapment. Our personnel were on the scene doing what they needed to. One firefighter killed, the rest put in the hospital, and VFIS was our insurer at the time. We learned some things from them, but they are not willing, neither are the rest of the insurance companies, to share all the details that give us a lot more information that we could all use in some way, shape, or form.
I gotcha. Well, even outside of the data and understanding what's happening, what would you say are some of the things that are impacting driving safety these days? What type of behaviors, what things can a department be aware of that can help in their, battling rising costs of insurance and just overall making it safer for their operators?
Yeah, I think the first thing, like a lot of things, is we've got to select the right people. Not everybody that's in your department should probably be driving a motor vehicle. I think one of the things I've learned in the last 5 to 7 years has been pretty interesting. When I talk to fire department training academies, or police academies, state police academies, they are now getting applicants who apply for a job as a firefighter, as an EMT, as a police officer, as a state trooper. In many cases, they don't even have a driver's license. So they're applying for a job in emergency services. They're getting to the job interview in some way, shape, or form. They might have all of the right background and everything else that we're looking for in the way of potential candidates in emergency services, but in some cases, they don't have a driver's license. And they're offered a job, we're told the day they report to the academy, they'd have to have a driver's license. Okay, so they show up at the academy with a driver's license, but how much driving experience do they actually want at that point? And do they have any driving experience at all in heavy equipment? So we got to make sure we pick and select the right people. Then we got to make sure that we train them, and we have to manage them or coach them in the proper way to do things in our emergency vehicle. Anybody that's been in this industry knows that the first time you get behind the wheel of an emergency vehicle and you're responding to an emergency with lights and siren, that's a whole different world than just driving your car to the grocery store to pick up groceries for the week. People who have been on the job for a long period of time tend to handle it better, but everybody gets excited when they see lights and siren, including the people that are in the rig.
Very true.
Including the person that's driving. So we got to make sure we got the right people. We've got to make sure we give them the proper training. Then we have to monitor them. And one of the things that we always suggest is that the agency that's managing those personnel, whatever agency it is that they're in or whatever job it is that they're doing, probably should do at least at a minimum annual motor vehicle record checks. Let's make sure that what the driver is doing on the days that they're off or not working in the fire department or rescue squad or whatever it is that they're involved with. In many cases, they might have a crash or some other infraction when they're not driving an emergency vehicle. If they don't report it, we might not know about it unless we check their motor vehicle weapons. And unfortunately, sometimes we find some personnel that have terrible driving weapons. Do we really want them behind the wheel of a full-size fire apparatus responding lights and siren to an emergency of some sort? That's obviously up to the individuals for running the agency, but we've got to be selective, careful about the people we put us behind the wheel, manage them, monitor them, watch their MVRs on a regular basis, and where necessary, call them out if they're not doing things the right way or need coaching on their driving as they respond to emergencies. So it's something that we got to keep up with on a regular basis. And it's usually up to the company officers are the ones that have to watch how their drivers are operating. We'll now coach them through whatever issues come up, and if they can't do it themselves, then we get the training division, safety division, or the administrative folks involved to manage that scenario.
A lot of that is very true. When you get into a fire apparatus, it's a whole different world. But, here in North Carolina, we do have a lot of departments that are volunteer departments or combination departments. And you have individuals who often are responding in their personal vehicles or their private vehicles when they're going to a scene or maybe meeting the truck on scene, wherever the accident or whatever is. How important is it to kind of focus on the safety of driving when it comes to even your personal vehicle when you're using it for emergency response?
Yeah, this is an area that's been a problem for a long time, all over the country. It's not just in North Carolina. We need volunteers, no question about it, everywhere. Well, in some areas that are very rural, these folks have to travel long distances to even get to the fire station. So in many instances, they go direct to an incident scene. They ferry their tent out there with them or whatever, and they might only be 2 miles from the emergency scene, but they could be 8 or 10 miles away from the fire station. So in many cases, they'll go direct to the scene, and in some departments, that's part of their normal everyday operation. Firefighters and EMTs will respond direct to the scene from wherever they are, as opposed to going to the station. There are a lot of departments, though, including ones that I've been involved with, who have stopped that practice over time because of the danger involved with volunteers responding in their private vehicles to emergency scenes. And go back to some of the things I just talked about, driving emergency vehicles. It varies from state to state. Some states just allow the volunteers to operate with warning lights of some sort. In Pennsylvania, for example, volunteer firefighters and EMTs are allowed to use blue flashing warning lights when they respond to an emergency. In some other states, like Michigan, they use flashing red lights and audible sirens as they're responding in private vehicles in some areas. So it varies mostly around the country. So once again, we've got to be careful about who it is that we're allowing to respond to an emergency, whether they're driving their own vehicle or a department vehicle. Ensure they've got the appropriate training. Take a look at their motor vehicle records, which we can do on a regular basis. I'll suggest at a minimum annually, just to make sure that we have an understanding of how they're operating on the roads, even when they're not involved in a particular department or agency. And then taking steps to correct any bad behaviors that are identified by the officers in the department or others that may report them from outside of the department, and that happens frequently.
My dad was a commercial truck driver my entire life. And when I started driving 30 plus years ago, he was very specific about making sure that I had good habits when I started out. Everything from buckle your seatbelt, don't be distracted by the radio, make sure that you pay attention to, traffic laws, how the intersections work. It's those really basic things that I remember that my dad taught me when I was learning to drive. And, and my son starts driving in February of next year. Please pray for me. So with that being said,
That's always a scary time.
Absolutely. And trust me, when I've done my EVD driving before, I've made people panic too, whenever the trainer, but that's a whole different story. But, just those foundational things, do they really change when it comes to, moving up to a fire apparatus, or does that same basic things like your seat belts and your traffic rules, does all that play a large portion there too?
The seatbelts are a big deal. And obviously, it's got to come from the top down. There's got to be a standard operating procedure when you get on the fire apparatus and you're traveling anywhere under any circumstances, emergency or non-emergency. You should be wearing a seatbelt. Well, there's been a lot of work done on that subject in the last 20 years or so to identify why people weren't wearing their seatbelts. Well, there's been a lot of solutions that came out of that in some cases. So there are ways to make that happen. And I worked a little bit with some folks from the fire department in New York who were also dealing with that specific issue. And one of the things that they found was that they had to change the type of seat belts that they were using on the rigs so that they were bigger, more visible, easier to handle, especially in the jump seat areas, for example, where personnel are trying to pack up for a structure fire or something like that. Obviously, nowadays we pack up for almost just about any fire, but at the same time, they found that they could make adjustments to the type of seat belts and the way they were installed on the rigs to get better compliance with people wearing them. Not wearing seat belts is still a major issue in the law enforcement field. We have law enforcement officers on a daily basis who operate without their seat belts in the same kind of situations that we run emergency vehicles in fire and EMS that have, unfortunately, terrible circumstances when they do get involved in a crash. So it's an area that is not 100% compliant around the country. Needs work in some areas, and it's got to come from the top down. The big boss in charge has to say, you will wear a seatbelt in the vehicle when you're traveling on business, whether it's responding to a fire, whether a vehicle crash, non-emergency situation, going to the grocery store to pick up groceries for the day or whatever. It's got to come from the top down.
So to kind of circle back on what, and I agree wholeheartedly with what you're talking about, like with the seat belts and even the basic stuff. And you talk about monitoring the driving habits, what's happening, at work, off work, things like that. But whenever it comes down to identifying the behaviors, the actions, the things that are unsafe, maybe it's the attitude. Some people are just aggressive drivers, to be honest. When it comes down to seeing those things, when we see those factors at play, what should be the leadership's response? Should it be disciplinary? Should it be, hey, let's retrain you, let's do a little bit of remediation? What typically is the most effective way to kind of start addressing those issues?
Coaching from the company officers is always the first choice. So you've got a driver in the left seat that's driving the rig through an emergency. You've got an officer in the right side seat who is not only preparing for whatever it is they might find when they arrive on scene, but prepping the crew as to updated information that they're either getting to the mobile computer or over the radio, whatever the case may be. They also got to be watching what the driver's doing. A lot of fire apparatus these days are being delivered with a speedometer on the officer's side of the rig. They might also have access to the emergency brakes on the right side of the rig. Obviously, the officer has control of the emergency warning lights and the use of the audible siren in some cases, but they know what the driver's doing, and they can coach them through. Slow down here, clear right, clear left, watching the intersections, making sure that we stop at intersections. Every time, if you've got a red light or a stop sign or a school bus that's got its lights flashing or whatever, regardless of the fact that we're responding to an emergency, we still have to stop. Look both ways, make sure traffic sees you before you proceed through the intersection. That's up to the officer on the right side of the rig to coach the driver as they see it's appropriate. And when if that's in the call that there were issues to be dealt with, that's the time to do it. If it can be done at the company level, that usually gets the best results. If you're not getting the results you want at the company level, then you have to elevate it. Retraining might be necessary. Reassigning to a different position rather than the rig driver might be necessary. Coaching or some other disciplinary action might be necessary. But like anything else in our business, you start out on the local level, try coaching and fixing the problem. And if that doesn't work, you elevate through whatever disciplinary process is in place in your agency.
Well, I do like the fact that you point out that, it could be just as simple as, hey, slow down real quick. Slow down for a minute. Hey, slow down at this turn. Hey, check your left. Things that simple can be much more effective in a lot of cases than any type of, monitoring system or anything we have in place. Sometimes it's just humans watching other humans, and that goes a long way in helping.
Yeah, and we got to remember, we're teammates. Anybody that's on that rig, and it doesn't matter what kind of rig it is that you're dealing with, we're teammates, and we've got to watch out for each other. Well, we all know that everybody's got a different approach to every emergency we go to. We've got to be thinking about getting to the emergency in one piece with everybody safe and ready to go to work. If we have a crash and move to the emergency, we're not helping anybody and we're creating even more of a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And, a lot of the issues that we see now, we talked at the beginning that things are getting more complicated. I'm not going to say they're getting worse necessarily for crashes, but we see a lot of, I know here in our area, we've seen a lot of issues on our interstates whenever there's a crash or, some event that has to be worked there. The department I work for, we've had some trucks damaged from incidents before. I know I was just watching a news clip this morning of a fire truck that rolled because they took a turn too fast. Things like this happen all the time. But part of what we do as firefighters are work motor vehicle accidents, and we're trying to avoid being in them ourselves. But when we do have to work them, that can be some of the most dangerous time that a firefighter will spend outside of their truck. And I know one of the things is the traffic incident management system, or TIMS. I know there was a big push on education with that a couple years ago, and we're always getting updates. Um, why don't you talk about the importance of that? Having an incident management plan in hand whenever it comes time to deal with that.
Yeah, I'll have a lot of people today to tell me they are less comfortable working roadway incidents than they are going into a burning building. Most of the firefighters that I talk to would rather fight a fire in a building than work a motor vehicle crash on the highway. And part of it's because I think we can do, in many cases, a better job of predicting what that building is going to do in a fire situation. We don't have any way at all of predicting what other drivers are going to do in the area of a motor vehicle crash or vehicle fire that we might be working on a highway and interstate, or even a two-lane rural country road. We have seen over the last 12 years all kinds of different incidents occur around emergency scenes where fire, EMS, and law enforcement is operating. When we talk about TIM, traffic incident management, or what I prefer to call roadway incident safety, it's got to start with training, and especially in the volunteer departments. What we found around the country is that in a lot of cases, new volunteers that come into the business, not ever having dealt in an emergency situation at all, are required to go through basic firefighter 1 training, probably EMT basic, and hazmat awareness. And after they get those certificates, they come back to the station and talk to the chief officer, will use their credentials and what they've done around the department, issues the turnout gear, and tells them they can go to the emergency the next time that the siren blows or the pagey goes off. And what we've got to remember is that in a lot of cases, those people have never, ever been to an emergency scene in their life. So part of it has to start with training to educate them about the hazards of working at incident scenes on the highway and what other traffic can do or present in the way of hazards when we're operating at that motor vehicle crash or vehicle fire or whatever the case may be. And I can tell you, having watched this for many years at this point, you have the highest probability of being involved in a struck-by incident if you're working a motor vehicle crash scene. That's where the majority of these secondary crashes, as we refer to them, occur. So we've got to be aware of that. We've got to have some basic standard operating procedures for our personnel to follow when they arrive at the scene of a motor vehicle crash. That's part of traffic incident management. And probably one of the biggest changes in the last 25 plus years is that we now routinely use fire apparatus to block an incident scene as kind of it's supposed to be the last level of protection, the last line of defense, if you want to put it that way, against drivers that we refer to as D drivers. They're distracted, they're drowsy, they're drunk, they're drugged, on a variety of other things. They're not paying attention to what they get, and they routinely run into our blocking vehicles on a regular basis. And you go, well, how do you not see a fire truck with flashing lights on it, high visibility graphics, parked sideways on a road on a high-speed highway? How do you just run into it and say you didn't see it? Well, still don't have an answer to that question, and we've never really been able to get an answer from anybody that has been involved in one of those secondary crashes that explains it. But the blocking vehicles are getting struck way too often, and that's in some cases because we need to do a better job of advanced warning and temporary traffic control. That means deploying cones, flares, signs, warning vehicles with message boards or flashing arrows, whatever the case may be. Doing a better job of communicating, collaborating with the other emergency services that are responding with us, law enforcement, maybe the Department of Transportation might have safety service calls operating in the area. They can handle putting up the cones and the arrow boards and things like that, but we've got to let them know that we need their help and request them on a regular basis. And then we've got to participate in what they call TIM committees or working groups that we see pop up around the country in a lot of places, where representatives from each of the different disciplines that respond to these roadway crashes meet on a regular basis. Typically, they meet quarterly, we'll say. Was use standard operating procedures, go over incidents that have occurred, talk about what worked well, review what didn't work so well and needs improvement, what they can do to change that, pool their resources to make sure that they've got temporary traffic controls and blocking in place of these incidents, and working in a variety of different ways to make the situation better. So traffic incident management is a big deal at this point. Like I said, we've already had 28 fatalities this year from being struck by a vehicle. Adding incidents soon has been over 300 incidents in the last 6 years. Well, we've had fatalities of emergency responders of also incidents on roads and highways around the country. So this is a big issue, at least in our mind, as we're looking at it on a daily basis. But that's where that data comes into play. You get other people's attention, like you were talking at the beginning of the podcast.
So, the common theme that I've heard, or at least that I've picked up since we started talking, is that training, education, possible re-education if need be, are the keys to really reducing the incidents and the hazards that we encounter with crashes and anything dealing with our vehicles. So if somebody wants to learn more about how to reduce their possibilities of having a crash, if they want to look at ways of being safer on the road, safer working an accident, what are some other resources that our listeners can get a hold of?
Well, obviously, I would start with your insurance value. Most of the ones who are handling insurance for emergency response agencies and departments have risk management or loss control people who can help provide that information that you need to put together standard operating procedures and training in their own department. Many of the insurance companies have training aids that they will give you in most places for little or no cost to help train your personnel on some of these things that we talked about tonight. So I would start there. There are tons of resources out on the internet that are available. On our website at the Emergency Responder Safety Institute, respondersafety.com is the website that we use. We have 48 online modules, learning modules on all aspects of roadway incident safety. How to set a block, how to set up upright traffic control devices, how to operate a TIM committee, how to train our personnel on how to develop an SOP for roadway incidents and things like that. It's free because it doesn't cost the users anything, because it's been put together with grant money through the U.S. Fire Administration and some other government agencies. So there's no cost to it. Every state now has an organization in place that can provide traffic incident management training for free, usually through either the statewide bio academy, depending on which state that you're on. The state police might be the ones that operate in some states, and the Department of Transportation might operate it in some states. And in some states, all three of those agencies will offer the training. It should be for free. I don't know of anybody that's charging for it anywhere in the country. It follows the national TIM training that was put together by the Federal Highway Administration. There's tons of resources available these days to do the training that needs to be done through your local fire academy, through the state fire academy, through some of the national programs that go on all over the country, on annual conferences and things like that. I don't want to sell that main drive. I'm a big fan of bioengineering and the Fire Department Instructors Conference each year in Indianapolis. What a wealth of learning goes on there on you haven't had a chance to go, that's another resource that just about any topic in the fire service, you can find somebody that's teaching a class on it or doing a workshop on it.
I got you. Well, Jack, I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us today about vehicular safety. That's something I think that gets overlooked quite frequently in the fire service when we talk about the training and what we need to be safe. But if folks want to get a hold of you, if they've got maybe a question that they want to have answered, or they want to learn more about your organization, where can they catch up with you at?
Everything on our website's free. ResponderSafety.com is a good start. My email address is respondersafety@gmail.com. I'll be glad to answer questions if anybody communicates by email. I answer emails all day long, so that's part of what I spend my time doing these days. Or might be glad to follow up. And if I don't have the answer, and I'll be the first to admit I don't have all the answers, I do have a very robust network around the country. If I don't know the answer, there's a great chance I can refer you to somebody who can help you out with the issue in the job.
Okay, very good. And I'm also going to throw a shameless plug out for VFIS of North Carolina right here. Jackie Ireland and Matt and Jeff and all those guys over there, they are a great resource here locally that I can speak personally for, because I know how passionate they are about this topic as well. And I really appreciate you taking time to be with us today, Jack. And, we have a saying here on our All Clear podcast. We always say, light your fire within.